Could Japan send XRP to $100? During today's episode, we break it down. And we're going to show you how 3 case scenarios are about to play out this week, starting with the great prediction out of Jake Claver that Japan will be raising their interest rates. Now, earlier today, the Bank of Japan confirmed they are planning to raise their interest rates at a minimum of 25 basis points this Friday. What's so interesting about this is that many are anticipating this will lead to a cascading effect of capital being pulled out of the American, European, and Asian economies to be brought back into Japan. Now, for the XRP community, this presents a very unique opportunity. XRP has established itself as the liquidity rails inside of Japan, partnering with the largest bank in SBI. With the ODL liquidity rails having already been established and the Jake Claver predictions coming to fruition, we're going to break down how one of 2 things is set to happen this Friday: major momentum across the market or a nothing burger for the XRP community. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Good Evening Crypto, your favorite crypto news related channel. If you enjoy this content, smash that like button and subscribe, as you're going to get an update every single day, 5:30 p.m. Eastern time. And I want our listeners to understand one thing: we are rooting for Jake Claver here on the Good Evening Crypto community, because if the picture he outlines comes to fruition, Jake Claver will go down in history as one of the greatest market predictors to ever exist, even far beyond crypto. But on a more important note, why this is set to impact the XRP community is because the world is about to restructure its debt, and XRP could be taking center stage. Now, we're going to start off with this video right here from about 24 hours ago out of Jake Claver, where he's highlighting the 3 major catalysts that are needed for his major theory to play out. We need a rate hike in Japan, we need an Epstein file release on Friday, and we need a spike in oil, which is happening today with the Venezuelan news that we're going to cover later on. Now, there is a major announcement, 9 p.m. Eastern, from the White House. Donald Trump is set to break some major news. That could be another pillar leading us into what Jake is outlining. Now, if you guys agree, smash that like button, support the channel. We're going to continue updating you on these headlines while they're still relevant here. And with the clock ticking, we're going to let this video play and break it down. Here it is.
Oil, spike in oil, mainly denominated in yen. I need a large move to the upside in yen versus oil. All right, I got that one. And then the other 2 are the Epstein docs, which are, they just happened to come out this Friday, the same day that they are going to raise interest rates in Japan. Man, that's wild that would coincide like that. I wonder what's going to be in those documents. I wonder if they're going to be any way associated with Bitcoin or Tether. I wonder if there's going to be any implications for either one of those assets if there were, documentation released that Epstein used them in some fashion. I guess we'll have to see. But I have a strong feeling that there might be. So that's another square. And then the last square before we have a full car blacked out from all the other stuff that I've been right about this year is the BlackRock ETF. And there's just so happens to be a BlackRock Trust ETF that they filed an A8 for, or an 8A for the other day. All they have to do is file the S1 and say what's actually going to be in that ETF. I wonder what would happen if the majority of that ETF was XRP. Every time Brad Garlinghouse has been asked about an ETF from BlackRock, he said that there's an NDA and he can't say anything. Every time that Larry Fink has been asked about the same thing on national television, he's also said, oh, you don't want me to talk about that. I can't talk about that. There's a there, right? We saw that they listed, and again, this could have just been a red herring or a wild goose chase, or maybe just foreshadowing. But in November of 2023, there was a BlackRock iShares XRP ETF trust that was filed in Delaware. And then it was swept under the rug because it had such significant momentum on the market when people found out or found that. And then they said, the DOJ, Department of Justice was investigating, and then we never heard anything else about it. So here we are 2 years later. We've got the ETFs. A lot of spot ETFs for XRP have been launched. They're eating through the supply that's available on the OTC desks and the dark pools. And it's about out. It's about empty. There's not a whole lot left over there. Maybe a couple 100 million left on the OTC and the dark pools. We saw 21 shares was acquired by FalconX. FalconX runs a dark pool, and they're not going to be selling any of that XRP that they have in that dark pool to anybody else. I bet they're going to be funding their own ETF with that. And it's about out. It's about empty. There's not a whole lot left over there. Maybe a couple $100 million left on the OTC and the dark pools. We saw 21 shares was acquired by FalconX. FalconX runs a dark pool, and they're not going to be selling any of that XRP that they have in that dark pool to anybody else. I bet they're going to be funding their own ETF with that. I mean, because that would make just business sense, right? You wouldn't be feeding your competitors. So that takes that right off the market too. And we're really down to the end of it here for the supply shock to happen. And I know, again, people are like, how can this take place in 15 days? Sit down, enjoy the holidays, and I'm excited.
And this is what we've been waiting for, Johnny. The major catalysts are playing out before our very eyes. And for all the people out there who have been critical of Jay Claver and his narrative, we must give credit where credit is due. He was correct about the timing of all of these narratives. We're sitting here in the last couple of weeks of December. Japan is ready to raise rates. Those files are ready to be released, and the Venezuela oil situation is escalating. We could see an oil spike in a way that we've never seen before. But I wanted to indulge in the Japan narrative for just a moment here, because I think this is what's most important for the XRP community. Now, guys, if you enjoy this content and you believe in Jay Claver, smash that like button. If you disagree, leave a comment underneath the video. But Johnny, a Japan-led liquidity shock could drive XRP to triple digits according to this analysis. From a macro perspective, Japan has the perfect stress test for XRP's utility. They have the world's largest net creditor, the massive yen carry trade exposure, aging bond market under raising rates, SBI deeply integrated with Ripple and the XRP ODL rails, and the legacy rails and the old system is dying before our very eyes. Now, for context, Wall Street cares about the 4 to 5 trillion in FX turnover touching the Japanese yen, the largest yen carry trade funding the world. This means people have been borrowing free money from Japan and investing in economies all around the planet that is going to be recalled starting on Friday. Now, we also have a very fragile market here with collateral and liquidity stress. If XRP isn't tapped as a liquidity solution, Johnny, this could have a cascading effect across every single market and definitely the stock market. Now, here are the 3 case scenarios. Scenario 1, ODL for FX only. This is the base case. Assume 10% of Japan's yen-related cross-border trades route through XRP with a conservative velocity of 20 to 30x, requiring let me just start over. Sorry, I burped. With conservative velocity at 20 to 30x, required liquidity support implies an $8 to $15 XRP impulse, no speculation, no hoarding. Now we have scenario number 2. That is the carry trade unwind, or the stress test that we have been talking about. If 1 trillion in emergency yen and repo possessions through FX trades hits the ODL rails in a short window, the liquidity math gets explosive. We could be looking at a $20 to $4 XRP to avoid a bottleneck on the XRPL. Now, we also have scenario number 3, Japan's scale infrastructure where the $100 triple-digit XRP appears. Now, what do we need? We need a regulated JPY stablecoin, tokenized deposits and repo settlement, bank-to-bank 24 atomic cross-border payments, and XRP being used as the neutral bridge asset across all rails. If XRP intermediates 2 to 3 trillion in annual settlement value across FX, security, and liquidity stress, even at a high velocity, we are looking at a $60 to $100 XRP just to keep the spreads tight and settlements instantaneous. Now, remember, XRP is not priced for volume. It's priced in stress for liquidity. We are seeing the liquidity rails be open, Johnny, and XRP potentially being tapped as a solution. And this is the moment that we've been waiting for a very long time in the XRP community. With the Japan trade finally unwinding, it's a make or break moment, not just for Jay Claver, but for XRP investors all across the world. Because can you imagine and can you indulge for a moment, if XRP was tapped as the liquidity solution, not only would it change our lives forever, it would change global finance forever. And tomorrow, we're going to be interviewing Sal Gilberti. I'm going to ask him a couple of tough questions in regards to this. But what I'm most excited about talking about is how the Japanese economy is a base case for global economies all around the world. Not only is the Japanese economy going to free up half of its liquidity by tapping into XRP, now you have instant rails to every major economy on the planet, which is going to solve this liquidity crisis that Jake is clearly outlining. Now, I do want to play just one more video for you all. And Johnny Krypto, I'm going to kick it right to you. This is Jake Claver outlining exactly why XRP would be tapped and chosen as the settlement mechanism for Japan. Guys, let us know underneath the video, what are some of your thoughts? Be sure to smash that like button. I want to give a huge token of appreciation to the entire Good Evening Crypto community. But with that being said, let's hear what Jake has to say about why Japan would select XRP.
There's a $10 trillion ticking time bomb sitting inside the financial system, and almost nobody is talking about it. Unless you've been here on this channel, we've covered it lots of times. It's the reverse carry trade. And when it blows up, we're going to need something that doesn't exist in the current banking system. And that's where I think XRP might step in. This is about financial infrastructure, systemic risk, and why Japan, XRP, and the digital yen might be the only thing standing between global liquidity and a global crisis. Okay, so if you haven't been here before, we're going to go ahead and go over what the reverse carry trade is. For decades, global institutions have been borrowing cheap yen at close to zero interest rates to buy higher yielding assets in dollars, euros, and other emerging markets. So they would borrow that yen from the Bank of Japan, swap it through FX to whatever currency they wanted, and then go put that to work, earning much higher returns. And then they owe 0% to the Bank of Japan. It's free money. And that is what the reverse carry trade is. It's close to $10 trillion in exposure. When rates shift or FX volatility spikes, these positions are going to unwind fast. Investors will have to sell off their foreign assets and rush to buy back the yen. So they have to sell in the stock market or gold or wherever else they're positioned, swap back to whatever the currency it was in whatever jurisdiction they purchased it, and then go back through FX to yen before they can repay those notes. So this slams the FX market, the bond market, and credit globally, all at once. So what's going to happen? It's not good, right? It's a tidal wave of capital surging back to Japan. Dollars, euros, and all of the other currencies that people are selling off to swap for the yen crash, and the yen will explode higher. Demand for the yen will be excessive. So US treasuries, they're going to be dumped. Yields are going to spike, and bond markets will break. Global liquidity will evaporate, just like in March of 2020, but much, much worse. The Bank of Japan will have two options. They can either let the yen appreciate and kill their exports, or they can defend the bond market and risk hyperinflation because they're going to have to print a bunch of yen in order to buy those bonds. It's a lose-lose situation, unless they have a third option sitting in the background. So this is where I think XRP might be the missing piece. So instead of dumping foreign assets directly into the yen, flows could be routed from, let's say, US dollars through XRP and then into the Japanese yen. XRP would serve as a liquidity buffer, routing flows around the FX bottlenecks. Settles in 3 seconds, doesn't require correspondent banking, and it could scale globally if price and infrastructure allow it. So let's get into what would actually need to take place for this to happen. You got SBI and the Bank of Japan. They would have to have strategic alignment. And we know SBI is Japan's largest and most aggressive fintech institution, and they own part of Ripple. So they operate SBI VC trading, and they also use XRP for live FX remittance. The Bank of Japan is developing a CBDC, which has been in pilot since late 2023, maybe 24. And this would allow them to program the stability of the bond market. But they would definitely need a playbook for this. You'd have to route FX through XRP. You'd have to be able to issue or go live with that digital yen. You'd have to offer yield or rewards for people holding the bonds, and then absorb capital inflows without destabilizing the yen or bonds. Okay, so this is a tricky dance. It's not like it's an easy thing to do, but if you had a liquidity buffer like XRP that could expand and contract to be able to mitigate this risk and volatility, it's going to be much easier to handle this situation when it happens. So how could this work? Like, XRP needs to have a couple things happen. For $5 to $10 trillion to be repatriated into the yen, you couldn't use traditional FX markets they would break. You need XRP liquidity pools large enough to absorb and route those flows. So let's do some math. To absorb $10 trillion in 30 days with about 5.5 billion XRP, and if that was turned over 10 times daily, XRP would need to be around $180 per token. This is a mathematical inevitability if it's going to serve in this purpose. The world doesn't need XRP height, it needs XRP liquidity for when this is going to happen. So let's break it down.
Well, guys, what I love about that analogy there is he clearly outlines how the XRP high price targets coincide with the narrative. In order for XRP to fulfill its purpose as a liquidity provider to the Bank of Japan, you need these liquidity pools to have hundreds of billions, possibly even trillions of dollars of value to handle the amount of volatility that he's talking about. He's talking about trillions of dollars hitting the rails overnight. And when you think about the switch of the flip narrative that has been applied to the XRP community forever, this coincides with that perfectly. Watching trillions of dollars overnight be turned onto the XRP ledger as a liquidity solution for the Bank of Japan, guys. If you're enjoying this content, smash that like button. Let's finish this video and kick it to Johnny Krypto.
Now, what are all the things that actually have to happen for SBI, the Bank of Japan, and the rest of the world for this to take place? The Bank of Japan would have to authorize XRP in FX settlement systems, okay? And we know that they've been building that in the background with Ripple for a long time, so probably in place. SBI needs to build deep liquidity pools between the yen and XRP and USD XRP corridors using RippleNet or the AMMs on the XRPL, which were put out a while back with XLS30. So it's possible. You would also need regulatory clarity in Japan for XRP. It would need to be approved as a settlement asset and also not have capital gains if it's being used in that capacity. You would need CBDC rails to go live with programmable yield to absorb the bond flows. And again, we know that that's been in pilot for a long time, so likely they probably have that in place. You would also need global partners to mirror those corridors for all of the currencies that we're going to be swapping back to the yen. So that's the US, it's euros, and any other jurisdiction where people have borrowed yen to be able to put it into financial markets. And then last, XRP liquidity would need to be locked, incentivized, and scalable. So we need a significantly higher price for XRP for it to be able to facilitate this. And again, there's a lot of ways that could happen, but you need a supply shock on the asset. If we don't have something like this in place and $10 trillion unwind, you have a credit collapse. You have FX disorder, and you have central banks out of tools to fix this problem. So XRP is perfectly positioned for this. It's neutral, it's fast, it's ready, but it needs the adoption, liquidity, and price to fit this purpose. And again, this is not speculation. This is about the infrastructure.
Well, Johnny, this moment has arrived. With everything happening before our very eyes, people are sitting there and wondering. Many people are praying for Jake Claver'S predictions to come to fruition. I find myself in that same camp. I am rooting for Jake Claver to be correct with many of his analysis. And fortunately for us, the timelines are aligning here. Those three major catalysts that he had outlined at the beginning of this video that would be necessary for XRP to be tapped as the liquidity solution, they're playing out as we speak. And tonight, 9 p.m. Eastern, Donald Trump may escalate that oil spike that we were just discussing, possibly with the Venezuela situation. But having been in this market since the late 90s, what is your analysis here when you think about all the predictions that Jake is outlining and how many of these catalysts are arising here in the back end of 2025?
So that's a great question. A lot of things are going through my mind as I'm watching that because, unfortunately, I've been one of those who has lived through a credit crisis. I lived through the 2007, 8, 9 crisis where the bond market went to zero and there was no money and the whole thing collapsed. And you know what? The world still ran and here we are today, right? So the reality is the world will always find a way to get around things. Now, that doesn't mean the world doesn't find ways to do it better. And that's what we may be at, right? If you remember, Bitcoin was kind of born out of that 2008 collapse. In fact, you started to hear about it in 2009 because of that. And it was like, well, how do we avoid it? So it is, to me, it's not inconceivable, impossible to look at it and say, okay, back in 2008, when we had that massive credit crisis, how do we solve for that? And now fast forward, almost 15, 18 years later, we may be on the cusp of something like that again with the yen unwind, that maybe now it'll be different, right? Because back then what happened was it was such a massive crash, Abs, that the government's had to step in and say, banks are too big to fail. We can't let them fail. We've got to put money up, and they actually put money up. So that's one way to do it. Or the other opportunity is kind of what Jake was described. But I like what Jake described there, because that was literally going through my head as he's talking about, I'm like, but so many things need to be in place for that to happen. And I know that in the background, we know that Japan has been a front runner on XRP in the XRPL. And so the question is, do they have all the parts in place? Have they, fully tested things? And are they ready to have it all set up and ready to go, so that his theory of kind of replacing that credit crunch, or having a mechanism there that can expand and contrast to take it, is it in place? And is it in place with all the other different countries that it needs to work with? And that's the answer that nobody knows. We all don't know the answer, but we're going to find out. We're going to find out soon in the next week or 2 weeks, because if those things are in place and things do go to crap with the yen, and then we will, maybe his theory could be correct, and we will see that replacement. And then, of course, I think the logic of him explaining why the price could be so high, I think there was some credibility there through that. So that's really the main question: is everybody ready? And like you heard him say, it's not just Japan that needs to be ready. I actually think Japan would be one of the countries that would be more ready. The question is the UK ready? Is America ready? And all the other countries, don't forget, we're not the only ones borrowing. $10 trillion have been borrowed. The US has borrowed about $2 trillion. So that means there's $8 trillion globally. Are those other $8 trillion, wherever they are throughout the world, also ready to play? That, to me, is the key question. And if they are, then there could be some credibility behind it. And like I said, we're going to find out in a few weeks.
And one thing we know for sure, Johnny, is that the biggest narrative working in favor of the XRP ledger during this entire Japanese crisis is the nostro vostro narrative. Freeing up half of the liquidity in the global banking system is just as important, if not more important, than being able to move this money instantaneously. Now, I want to remind people, the reason that these markets are so overvalued is because over the last 20 years, we have seen $10 trillion borrowed at 0% interest and purchasing assets like the S&P, purchasing assets like American real estate, and of course, Bitcoin and XRP as well. Now, there is one chart I wanted to show you all before the end of today's episode, because one thing that we're seeing right now, silver is separating itself from gold. And this is what I'm thinking is going to happen to the XRP price chart in the beginning of 2026. When you look at what's happened here for silver, there's been a clear decoupling from gold and the rest of the commodities market. That is what I'm anticipating for XRP in the digital asset space towards the beginning of 2026. If you enjoyed this content, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you all in the next one. So if you're looking to do the same strategies that we implement here on Good Evening Crypto, I would advise everybody sign up for Merlin and click on the ITrust Capital link below. Now, why did these two ideas play off one another? Merlin is going to allow our listeners to understand where they should be taking profit in this market, and ITrust is going to allow our listeners to take that profit tax-free through an IRA product. Now, that's not the best part about this. We are giving new clients a $100 sign-up bonus using the promo code GEC9. So I would encourage everybody, click on the link below the video, use promo code GEC9, and set yourself up for success during this crypto bull market.